Welcome, everyone. We're so excited to be here today. While we are letting participants in, we'll give it just one more minute before we get started. But we're excited to celebrate Legislative Lobby Days with SACAC, the Southern Association of College Admission Counseling, and the American Association of University Women. It's so good to see all of you here joining us. Just a reminder, this is a webinar series, so if you do have questions, we do want to give you the opportunity to ask them, but please use the Q&A feature on your web form in the panels control of your screen in order to ask any questions, and we will make sure to answer those in the presentation, or if it's not addressed to David, Richie and I will definitely take the question for you. So without further ado, we'll get started. Again, hi everyone, welcome to our SACAC AEW Legislative Lobby Days. My name is Rose Llanos. I support the Government Relations Committee in Florida for SACAC, and we're so excited to be here today. We're currently at the Capitol, a few flight delays, but we've made it. So we're combining forces with the American Association of University Women and our SACAC team to be able to prioritize NACAC legislative priorities in regard to college admission counseling, equity policies related to gender equity, economic security, Pell Grants, all the laws and bills that are important to us as a group. So we're so excited to be here representing you all. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to my colleague, Richie Morini. He is an admissions counselor at USF and has a great background in advocacy work. And I'm so excited that he's going to be leading the session today. And we are going to introduce our speaker. So I'll go ahead and turn it over. Thank you so much, Richie, for helping.
Thank you so much, Rose. To get started here, I'm going to introduce David Hawkins, who is our Chief Education Policy Officer for NACAC. He's going to provide a little bit of an update, a legislative update on the agenda items.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Richie. And I don't know, Rose, if I'm supposed to be using the camera or not, but it says it's blocked. So I'd be happy to use it if that's helpful. Happy to go audio if that's the way to go.
Absolutely. Let me go ahead and make you a co-host. All right. And you should have access to share your screen.
Okay.
Let's make you a panelist, promote to panelist. I think you went back to attendee. There you go. How about now?
Okay, it looks like I'm in now.
Thank you for your patience.
Oh, absolutely. I am so familiar with Zoom and all the various glitches and nooks and crannies that you can get hung up in. So thank you very much to you, Rose and Richie, for having me. I do have a presentation that I can use. Will I be okay to share my screen today?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. Let me go ahead and get that set up, and then I'll get started. And I want to make sure to leave time for Q&A. So
thank you.
Here is the share. Can you all see this?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. All right. Well, yes, I am David Hawkins. I'm Chief Education Policy Officer here at NACAC. And if I look off to my side, it's only because my PowerPoint is over on the next screen over. So I promise I'm paying attention to my own remarks. I want to start by thanking you all for taking the time out of your busy schedules to advocate. You'll notice that I'm going to thank you profusely throughout this. And anytime you hear from me, you'll hear that gratitude because I know what it's like to take time out to do things that are outside of the scope of my regular job. I've often mentioned my PTA service, which I'm sure all of you will understand. But this time I'll also mention that I was a youth soccer coach, well, assistant coach, which basically is the guy that retrieves all the errant balls when they go off the field. But I really, really appreciate what it's like to take on a leadership role outside of your job. So I want to make sure I thank you. My experience with those young men playing soccer, they were around late elementary, middle school age, was just such a great and rewarding experience. And I hope that advocacy will be much the same for you. So I'm just going to take a minute today to go over NACAC's legislative priorities, along with some of the issues that we're watching right now, and a brief sort of touch on some of the tools that we use to keep everyone updated. But what I'll do is, as I slide into the presentation here, I will note right up front that you are the experts when it comes to advocacy. I think one of the most important lessons I've learned over the years in hosting NACAC members and affiliate members here in Washington is that there can be a lot of trepidation around advocating, especially when you're going to meet with elected officials and or their staff. And so the bottom line always for me is just to stress, if you've been on these visits, then you know what I'm talking about. But if you haven't, it's just really important to say that a lot of people who hold elected office know very little about the issues that they're voting on. And the critical role that constituents play in the legislative process is to shed light on the issues that these elected officials are supposedly representing and voting on. And so you are the best qualified person to share the challenges, the opportunities, the successes, and the resources that you know as part of your daily work. And that's really what elected officials are looking for. They are ostensibly there to solve problems. Now, I know that there are many states now that are creating more problems than they're solving, and that's a related discussion. But even on those issues, your experience as someone who has to work under the conditions often that legislators have a pretty important say in is a critical story to relate to elected officials. So I say that all to say you don't have to know everything about the legislative process, about how a bill becomes a law, about how many votes it takes to pass a supermajority. All that stuff is what those people are hired to do. Your job is to come in and share your perspectives, and that's why you are the expert. So I hope as you go through with these visits and these meetings, you will both now and in the future, you will walk in with a degree of confidence that, I know my job better than anyone else. And so I'm going to come and talk about it. And what I hope to do today is to share a little bit with you about what our priorities are. And I'll say that our priorities here at NACAC are roughly divided into two categories. The first is where NACAC leads. And as you can see on this slide, these are areas where really NACAC and our affiliates are poised to be the go-to voice on these issues. On a lot of other issues that we'll also talk about NACAC supporting, there are other organizations that seem to be more in a leadership position, maybe because of who they are, who they represent, what kind of function they have. And in some cases, perhaps it's associations that represent the entire institution. So your presidential organizations, so based on seniority or hierarchy. But these issues here, student and equity-centered admission practices, that's really core to who we are. We are in part admissions officers. And at NACAC, one of our founding sort of components was that the member institutions that formed NACAC wanted to make sure that given all of the interests that are involved between institutions and schools and other players, that the student interest be kept front and center. So that makes us unique as an organization, that we are actually mindful of students as they go through this process. And we're not solely focused on our needs as professionals or institutions or schools. So that, combined with our commitment to equity, which I know is in Florida sort of ground zero for this conversation about equity and quote unquote divisive concepts. We are firmly committed to equity and the process of a continual improvement around equity. And so I'll share a little bit more about what that means on when the rubber meets the road. But suffice it to say, that fits very squarely into our reason for being as an association, and in fact, who we are as admissions officers. The second bullet that you see is professional responsibility and ethics. For those of you who've been around NACAC, you'll know that we have had our code of ethics for many, many years. I mean, we were founded in 1937, and that, with a set of very rudimentary principles, but those principles have been expanded on over the 80 some years since we were founded. So that also remains core to who we are. We no longer enforce our code of ethics because of a Department of Justice investigation that occurred a couple of years ago, but we do still maintain them as best practices. And so we do very much want to keep that front and center. And then finally, the expansion of capacity and impact of school counselors and college advisors. So right there, you see that really the three major components of our organization. You see admissions represented, you see ethics, and you see counseling and college advising. So those are the issues where we're going to lead, and I'll talk a little bit in depth about those, just slightly in depth, and then we'll go into the issues that we support, and then we'll talk a little bit about the issues that seem salient right now in both state and federal contexts. Okay, there we go. So what does student and equity-centered admission mean when we talk about it in the legislative or advocacy context? Well, one very obvious component is the Supreme Court case involving UNC Chapel Hill and Harvard as sued by the Students for Fair Admissions group. And we certainly want to emphasize, as we have before the Supreme Court, but overall, the needs of systematically underserved and underrepresented students. And we did submit an amicus brief to the Supreme Court in support of UNC and Harvard. We know that the court is poised to further narrow the grounds on which we consider race in admission and potentially even eliminate it. And so we'll be doing a lot of work to inform the profession once this decision comes out, which we expect around June. And we want to make sure that a lot of times when a Supreme Court decision comes down, you have this sort of overwhelming tendency towards caution, conservatism in a cautious way, not the political version of conservatism. So we want to make sure that colleges and high schools and students understand the parameters of the decision, because there is likely to be some shade of gray involved, and we want to make sure that we're there to help interpret that. But beyond the Supreme Court, we've been fighting on these grounds since 1978 with the Bakke decision. And really, we think that there's so much more to be done when it comes to factoring equity into everything we do as college admission counseling professionals. So a large part of our advocacy moving forward is going to be building a base of best practice, of research to help share out and inform either legislation, practice, or other forms of policy, including institutional and system policy. So you can expect a lot more, but if you haven't seen it already, we did release a report last year with our colleagues at the National Association for Student Financial Aid Administrators that really looked at a future where we rethought college admission with the goal of equity in mind. And so we are currently developing all sorts of new initiatives to try to make good on the recommendations that came out of that report. So you'll see a lot more from us, both in terms of general advocacy and also legislative advocacy out of this. But probably the next thing you'll see is the Supreme Court analysis. Ethics, again, this has been something we've done for a very long time. Now that we don't enforce, we want to shift our focus to communicating, educating, and advocating on our best practices so that people are aware of them, people know why they're in place, and they can be used to inform policy debates. One example of those policy debates involves for-profit colleges and their often unscrupulous recruitment practices. This goes back decades. In fact, it extends back to the GI Bill after World War II, but it persists to this day. We see continual challenges with unscrupulous, high-pressure sales tactics, and that's just not the way admission ought to be done. So we do find ourselves still talking about that to legislatures, both state and federal, and will continue to do so. Then finally, we would obviously seek to expand our work in advocating for school counselors and college advising. This map is based on data from a couple of years ago, but the data hasn't changed radically since then. And you get the sense for just how many school districts in Florida have relatively high, certainly at least 450 to 1 and potentially 500 to 1 or greater in districts across the state. So that you can see there's still ample need in Florida for school counselors, so we can reduce those ratios. College advising is something that often augments school counseling. We would be supportive of that. And our mantra basically is at the state and federal level, we need more funding to hire, train, and equip school counselors, college advisors to work with students, because we know from our research that working one-on-one with a school counselor can make a difference. Regardless of a student's other circumstances, working with a school counselor one-on-one or college advisor one-on-one increases the likelihood that a student will fail out of FAFSA by 7 times, increases the likelihood that they'll go to college of any sort, which includes 2 4-year, career, technical, what have you, 4 times. And then those students are twice as likely to enroll in 4-year colleges. So there is a definite effect, a positive effect that school counselors and college advisors have on students' post-secondary pathways. So what happens to all the other issues? Well, we still support college affordability. We still support the DREAM Act and our undocumented students. We definitely want to promote global student mobility, and we support transfer pathways. And there's lots of other issues that I could have thrown onto this slide. But bottom line is we're not going away from these issues. We are aware that we are among many, many different leading voices on these issues, and will join the chorus as we have always done. For instance, doubling the Pell Grant is something that's a priority of ours, and we're part of a coalition called the Double Pell Coalition that includes really all of higher education, all of the groups that are involved in higher ed. So these things we will not forget about them. We are absolutely still playing on these issues, but we expect that there's a lot of other leadership going on, and that when called, if there are issues that we are asked to address specific to counseling and admission, we will lead in those areas as well. But at this point, we are mostly playing a supporting role on these, informing and lending our considerable voices. In NACAC now, we have 27,000 individual members. So if we can get 27,000 people speaking on an issue, we can make a difference that's pretty significant. And of course, there are more members than that in our collective affiliates. So when affiliates like yours speak up, you can make a difference as well. So that's why it's important that we all speak to our elected officials. So what's happening right now? Well, I mentioned the Supreme Court decision. That's gonna create a lot of attention. That's going to attract a lot of attention when the decision comes out. The other thing that's associated with that decision is we are starting to see bills introduced. I know they've been introduced in Utah and Texas so far, but it's a templated bill. So this is the same bill in all of these states that would further restrict the consideration of race and ethnicity in all public sort of processes. So college admission, but also hiring and things like that for state agencies. So we imagine that the knock-on effect from this decision will be significant, and that we will face some state legislative battles in the future. Another reason, though, that we want to expand the playing field. We are frankly tired of playing defense on this issue. Equity is critical. Diversity means a lot to a student's educational journey, whether or not they come from an underrepresented background. It improves educational outcomes. It improves the quality of the solutions that people come up with when they're working in groups that are diverse. And frankly, we will not succeed as a nation, as an educational system, until we address the systemic racism that plagues the system. So that's going to be an area where we're really focused over the next several years. Equity in general, we're seeing a lot of the laws that frankly Florida has been sort of, as I said, ground zero for. We are obviously very concerned about the effort to censor or restrict what can happen in the classroom. We do think that this has a profound effect on what students bring with them to post-secondary education, and it can certainly exacerbate the equity issues that we already see in the college pipeline for underrepresented students. So our core values include a commitment to equity. It includes commitment to fairness and social responsibility. So we feel that this work that's being done to sort of deny that there is a a problem with equity, to deny that there is a conversation to be had around equity is certainly unfounded, and one that we would hope to see substantially changed in direction as we move forward. So education funding is something that we always talk about at both the federal and state level. If you've been around education, or maybe if you haven't, you might be surprised to know that states provide about 90% of direct appropriations for K-12 and higher ed. So the vast majority of the funding for schools and colleges comes from the state level, which is why it's so important, again, to have this state voice. And another reason why I appreciate that you do what you do. Certainly the federal government does provide about $90 billion in support, so that's a non-trivial amount. A lot of that is wrapped up in the student loan programs and in the federal financial aid programs for college. So we certainly advocate for federal funding as well. I talked a little bit about student protections under the ethical practice area. And then financial aid notification. We have seen a couple of bills introduced on Capitol Hill this year to require colleges to use a standardized financial aid notification form. And so I expect, since there's bipartisan support for that, I would not be surprised if that passed at some point over the next 2 years. So just be aware, NACAC is working with NASFA on a voluntary set of standards that, at a minimum, if the legislation isn't passed, will be available to colleges to use as a best practice model. But our secondary goal is that if this legislation does gain momentum, that these standards can form a sort of backbone for what the legislation could look like. Because the worst thing we can do for students is write a bad bill and have the financial aid notification forms that are required by Congress be even worse than what we've seen already. So that's something that we're paying close attention to here in Washington. I only have a few minutes left, and I want to make sure we have time for Q&A, but obviously we work in coalitions up here. We never do anything alone as NACAC. So this is just an example. I just want to give you a sense of how many coalitions are out there, how many organizations we already work with. We do work with all of the ones that are here on the screen. And we definitely work with some that you don't see on the screen because there just wasn't enough room. But all of these organizations typically have state correlates. So anytime you're working on issues, as I've noted, or as I see from today, you're already working with AAUW. There are so many different groups that you can work with. So at any point, if you feel like, wow, I'd really love to be partnered with people, we can help connect you to those folks in Florida at any time. Some of the resources and tools, we do have the capability to create action alerts. I know we've done a few for Florida in the past. Those are great ways to get your word out to elected and appointed officials. No, they don't read them all, but yes, they do tally them. So it sometimes can be critical when an issue comes up that you're able to submit these action alerts and have them go to legislators whose staff will be counting the number of emails they're getting about specific issues. So certainly an important part of the process. I'll also note here, I'm just leave this slide up for a second. These are the different ways in which we share information about advocacy. I encourage you, if you're interested in our legislative updates, to send me an email at that address. Follow me on the Wonk. That's where I try to do the sort of up to the minute news, though we do cross post quite a bit. So if you're not a Twitter fan, no worries, it'll show up elsewhere, particularly in the NACAC bulletin. That's something that we try to share everything there that gets covered on the Wonk. And then of course we have our website advocacy section where everything kind of lives for the long term. So again, I'll close with a thank you. I know that it takes a lot to do this work. We greatly appreciate it. I know your students may not know it, but they would appreciate it too, that you're working on both on behalf of them and of the profession. And as I said a minute ago, if you do have questions that we don't get to during this webinar, or if you want to talk to me at any point, I am highly accessible. So please do send me an email and I'd be happy to follow up. So with that, I will stop sharing and we can go into Q&A mode, and I'm happy to discuss anything federal or state-based that I can shed light on.
Thank you so much, David. It's wonderful to see the support that NACAC provides as well as SACAC. I think being able to empower each other through our associations is a huge resource that we're unaware of. And so whether it's the 2-minute activist alerts and, Richie will discuss a few of the bills that we're trying to prioritize here. It's really interesting to see, how that's being taken to Washington and how students can be able to also advocate on a more wider platform. I guess I would be curious, we also have our Q&A open if anyone has questions, but in the meantime, while participants are adding any questions in, just to see whether in the past there have been opportunities for our associations and in our regions to be able to go to the Capitol in Washington before, and what that's been like. I know we're trying to revamp some of our efforts here in Tallahassee pre-COVID, after COVID. So I think it is important for students to hear for legislators to hear our voices, our personal stories, and I'm just wondering, even how you relate with your diversity, equity, inclusion apart from work, and what those possibilities may look like at, a wider level.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'm happy to go into some depth on that. And we'll also, I want to make a reminder to myself to talk a little bit about the visits and how they can sometimes go, and what might be a good way to take advantage of them. But to your questions, Rose, we used to have a legislative conference that was sort of piggybacked onto our annual President's Council meeting. So all of the presidents, the presidential trifecta from each affiliate, which we call our President's Council, would come to Washington and have their winter meeting in late February, early March. They no longer have that meeting. So our sole vehicle for really organizing and having a place to meet was through that meeting. So the expenses were borne by the President's Council, the governance thing. And so when the pandemic came around, first of all, that obviously stopped us in our tracks. And then when the President's Council decided not to meet in the winter anymore, we were left with no budget and no way to sort of get people here to Washington and have a venue for them to be in. So that's just a little bit of background about how that got stopped. I will say that for the last 2.5 years, you would be looking at the entire advocacy department, and I also oversee 5 other functions. So we've been a little capacity strapped, but I'm very happy to announce that starting in May, we will have a new director of advocacy who I will work with. So there will be someone taking over this work. They will start to hire a team, and one of the first things that I will talk to them about is how do we ensure that we continue the DC presence for our members, that provide opportunities for not just the handful of members that are engaged in affiliate advocacy, but also the large number of members, the 27,000 that I mentioned earlier. How do we make sure that they have opportunities to also connect with their legislators? So stay tuned for more on that. It's a good question. You did ask a question about DEI, and one of the things that we see as being important with the DEI issues is, number one, we want to be comprehensive in our approach. So as an organization, we're starting to develop an ed and training certificate in DEI. We obviously have our Guiding the Way to Inclusion conference every summer. And there's lots of other initiatives going on, but specifically in terms of advocacy, that report that I mentioned, that I could probably put in the chat if you haven't already seen it. So I'll kind of stall for time here for a second, but that contains a lot of recommendations, and they're fairly high level recommendations. And so one of the things that was a really critical next step for me and for NACAC was to start to operationalize those recommendations. So we said this. So many association reports just end up sitting on a shelf. And so let's see if I can get this to everyone. I'll put this link here. And my goal for this report was that these recommendations did not sit on a shelf, that they came alive. And so one of the things we've just done is we have convened a small conference called Elevate Equity, and it was in Chicago last month. And we had presidents, trustees, and senior admissions officials from about 25 different institutions. So they came as teams, and you had 2 days of dedicated discussion time about how can we improve equity on our campuses through the admissions process. And we basically went section by section through this report that I just linked and talked about the ways in which there are challenges to equity, barriers, and how we can turn those challenges into opportunities. So, and that was one cross-cutting recommendation from the report, that we make time for people inside the institutions to get on the balcony, is what we call it, is to take a step out of their day-to-day work, to think big, to think about the long term. Because we know that it's tough. I mean, your job is an all-consuming thing. It can be very difficult even to find any time with your college president or your school principal, to talk strategy. So creating a safe space for everybody to come together and talk about these issues was a critical first step for us. Another cross-cutting recommendation was to center student voices in the admission policy and practice decision-making process. So one of the first things we did, we got a grant from Kresge Foundation to convene a hybrid committee. We have a committee of NACAC members that has also been joined by a group of students. And we are in the process right now of going through the entire decision-making process on a typical campus of anything related to recruitment, admissions, enrollment, and ways in which we can integrate students into those processes. So again, not your traditional advocacy, but a step towards urging institutions, which is in itself a form of advocacy, to consider taking some of the steps that we will outline in this committee's report within the next couple of months. If to the extent that they're not already doing these things, to encourage them, to advocate to them, to make these kinds of changes in the areas where they can control. And then when we look at areas that are outside their control, well, then we start to do the more traditional advocacy. You're talking about institutional leadership, trustees, state legislators, and even sometimes federal officials. So we will eventually get to a point where there's a lot more on the legislative plate when it comes to DEI. So that's just a little bit of an overview, and there's a lot more going on where that came from. And I don't see any other questions, so I may just flow right into the one thing that I wanted to add to my presentation, which was that oftentimes, your visit is, no two visits go the same way, right? So when you're talking to an elected official, you may go into an office and they make it clear that, after maybe looking at our priorities or just knowing what educators care about, they may be on your side. You may walk into another office and they're just not going to listen to you because they've got their head set on sort of policies that are diametrically opposed to what we prioritize. But in any of those cases, one of the ways in which we can get to know our legislators more is just to simply say, I'd love to be a resource. I'd love to be able to help you get a good look at what's going on in our schools. We'll get a good look at the challenges that are facing our students. And in that case, you can invite people to your campuses. You can invite legislators to do like a college application night, college application financial aid night that you would be willing to help with, things like that. So think creatively when it comes to ways in which you can engage with these legislators. And those tips have actually worked really well for us. We've had a lot of examples of people going into legislative offices and starting with that level of engagement. Then it leads to more and more, because as these people interact with you, they then know that anytime, oh gosh, yeah, we're talking about college admission, I ought to call Richie. I met with him a few months ago and we've got his card. I'm going to call him and see what he thinks about this. So that's the kind of thing I want to encourage, that if you go into an office, it can just be an introduction. It can just be as simple as that. And you can hand off priorities, do whatever you want to convey our priorities. But the bottom line is we want these people to understand what we do, because without understanding, we've got really no hope of them acting in our interests if they're dead set against it. So I'll stop my rambling there. What other questions do you have, or anything else you'd like me to cover?
Thank you so much, David. I think it's so important to really understand the resources that are available to us, especially admissions counselors, and how collaborative it really is, a multi-level pronged approach. We can't really just necessarily rely on one person itself, nor do we want to. I think this is really important to have those different types of inputs from each of those stakeholders that make up our organization and those that we partner with to be able to serve students and staff within this organization. So I appreciate that. And I think for now, those are the questions. We're so grateful for the time that you took in spending this half hour with us. And, we look forward to potentially participating in any Capitol days that that will, can follow through after your director of advocacy has settled in a bit. So we will definitely look forward into any new updates, and thank you for all the work that you're doing. We really are encouraged, and it's so reassuring to hear just the amount of support that, NACAC provides to the regions in our different counseling areas. So thank you again.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Okay. So we'll turn it over to the next part of the programming. Just see if my colleague Richie is on.
Hi, Rose. Thank you.
Sure.
And thank you so much for David. That was an amazing presentation. We're gonna go over briefly the Capitol agenda for today and tomorrow. So it looks like for this afternoon, there are gonna be some meetings with Senator Lauren Book, who's the Senate Minority Leader, to talk about SB 326, which is the Menstrual Products Bill, SB 576, which is the Employee Leave Wage Salary History Bill. And then it looks like there's gonna be another meeting with the Education and Employment Committee to talk about House Joint Resolution 31, which is a partisan election for school boards. And then the Ethics and Elections, same, it's going to be the Senate Joint Resolution 94. And then tomorrow from 8:30 to noon is more lobbying with Senator Lori Berman's office talking about SB 166. I do want to mention a couple of other bills that are on the radar that we might possibly be talking about. And that's going to be SB 590 or HB 51. That is the prohibited discrimination based on hairstyle in the education system. We'll also be talking about SB 266 or HB 999. That's probably a pretty popular one in the news right now. That is the bill that would effectively end funding for diversity, equity, and inclusion and make some changes to curriculums at several state institutions regarding like gender studies. And then I'm going to briefly talk about some more resources that we have in terms of advocacy, whether you could make it to the Capitol for this visit or not. I highly encourage you to reach out to your senators or representatives. The Florida House website does a really great job of allowing you to plug in your information and then showing you who your elected representatives and senators are. It'll show you which committees they're on. The website is also very good for tracking bills. So if you know that that HB 999 is something that you want to have your eyes on every step of the process, you can actually create an account through the Florida House website. You'll click on the bill and click track, and then you'll receive email updates every time something happens to the bill. So if there's an amendment proposed, if it's referred to another committee, if it's passed on the floor, you will receive all of those almost in real-time updates in your email, which is a great resource. And then I do want to talk about just some of the things you can say when you're meeting with your legislators if you're fortunate enough to get an in-person meeting. Definitely you want to mention those magic words, I am a constituent. Obviously they care about everyone, but knowing that you are part of their district is very important. And like David mentioned before, we are the experts and we are the resource. So something you can talk about with your legislators is to provide your personal story. I think David mentioned this a little bit. You're going to want to talk about facts and information, and you're going to want to provide like any kind of anecdotes or anything to really make it personal, to kind of bring your experience to them. And then if you're fortunate enough to have an in-person meeting, it's always a good idea to have something physical to leave behind. So just like a one sheet with like a summary of priorities, maybe some contact information, because even if they don't, even if the conversation doesn't go where you think it might, at least you're leaving them with something to think about on your way out. And then we also mentioned the 2-minute activist messages. Rose, do you know if those have gone out yet? Or if those are planning to go out?
Yes, so at the national level, they are going to be forthcoming. So our legislative session will be going till May. David did include the HERE Act Now, which is a 2-minute activist legislation that you can support. So I'll include that in the chat so that if you are interested in supporting and signing that or sending that and sharing that with people that you know that would love to participate in that you can. So I'll add it now.
Thank you so much. And then I just want to cover a couple brief don'ts on the lobbying side, on the advocacy side. You don't want to cover too many issues. You want to keep things kind of pointed to like 1 or 2, kind of the main idea, just so they don't get distracted. You don't want to be argumentative. It's a very, how do I put it, cordial conversation. And definitely, I wouldn't go in there doing all the talking. Definitely see what the give and take is. The legislator you're meeting with might be really well versed on the subject, and they might already have opinions formed, or your legislator might be a little fresh on that subject and they're dying to hear what you have to say. So definitely just feel it out and see what's most appropriate for that session. And then don't be afraid. I'm sure all the admissions folks are familiar with this, but if you don't know the answer, don't be afraid of that. Definitely feel free to say, I don't have that right now, but I can always follow up with you later. And it looks like Rose put some really good information in the chat as well about making appointments with your state legislators. Thank you for that. And then are there any questions about advocacy, anything we just covered? Feel free to utilize the chat.
And we'll also make sure that all of you receive any of these resources. We do have a really comprehensive resource list so that you can have links that you can go to read about more information. I know Richie recommended, handouts. So I'm going to be showcasing some handouts here that you can see of what we're using to be able, sorry about my background, but we have some handouts that we'll give to our legislators that kind of show reasons why we're supporting or what areas that are of concern if we are trying to speak to our legislator about things that will affect students and those within our profession. Again, this is a non-partisan approach, so we really do want to stress the level of, what would be those that benefit or those that are disadvantaged through these different changes of the bills that are proposed. And so Richie did a great job about talking about, the different bills that we're collaborating with AUW on, whether it's menstrual products and how it affects students in education, whether they have those resources or not. School choice is another thing that whether those that are disadvantaged will be able to benefit from this new legislation. We have things such as human trafficking that occurs very widely throughout Florida, and that's something that is sometimes seen within the school system that we want to be mindful of. So I think those are all areas, and working within post-secondary education. I represent Lynn University. I'm so happy to be an admission counselors working with transfer students, and so is Richie as working with undergraduate students for USF. And those are things that we want to stress the importance of as we are working with our students and knowing what concerns they have and how we can best mitigate those concerns when it comes to prioritizing whether it's school choice or post-secondary public academic freedom. So thank you so much, Richie, for that.
Thank you. If I could add just one last thing before I turn it back over. If you weren't able to make it to lobby day this week, definitely still reach out to your representatives either via phone or email. Just a tip for phone, they usually have 2 offices, a Tallahassee office and a district office. Obviously, everyone's in Tallahassee right now for a session, but those phones could definitely get busy. So go ahead and feel free to give the district offices a call as well. You might be able to get someone on the phone much easier there.
That's a great point, Richie. Thank you. And even today we were able to meet with Senator Driscoll about the Crown bill, and we were also going to book an appointment and have an appointment tomorrow. And that only happened because I followed up via email, but also had to call the Tallahassee office to check if they had received my email, just due to the nature of how busy they are. So we were able, since Senator Berman is pretty busy this week, we're going to meet with her legislative aide, Abby Ross, which will be tomorrow, as you can see on the agenda. So that's something that will still is very important to us. And sometimes, they're really the right hand of our representatives and senators. So it's a great way to have that conversation with any team members of those that are supporting the bill or proposing the bill. Thank you. All right, so Richie and I have the pleasure of working together with our Government Relations Committee. This is also just one of the many few ways that you can interact with SACAC or NACAC, whether it's on a legislative level, whether it's reading about diversity, equity, inclusion. There's virtual book clubs. I'm participating this year in SACAC Leads and have been able to network with so many more college admission professionals about just our growth and where we want to be able to have impact in different areas of our jobs and our professional development. We are hoping to go to SACAC and connect with each other in person, but a lot of these programs allow that virtual capability for any of you that are busy doing your normal 9-to-5 job, which in admissions doesn't even exist. So we always know that there's always a few people behind the curtain, and we really value those people, but we do want to encourage you all to also connect with us in many other different ways, since that will not only fulfill you even further, but give you that opportunity to grow as an individual and make an impact to your community. So please feel free to look through all of these different opportunities that you can have, whether you're on the college admission side, or whether as a high school counselor, for example, guidance counselor. Many times membership is free to join, and so we really do understand this is a growing network. We want to prioritize our needs. We want to support and provide resources in every way that we can. So we'll definitely encourage you to refer to our SACAC website to see other ways that you can get involved. And for the guidance counselors, membership for counselors is completely free. And many times there's different grants, like the Dream Grant, where SACAC can fund, provide resources for those that need any additional funds. Richie, are you going to be able to attend the SACAC conference this year?
To be determined. I'm, of course, waiting on the budget folks to get back to me. So fingers crossed, but it seems that things are moving in the right direction.
That's exciting. So Richie and I have been able to meet on the road, and it's one of my favorite ways to connect with other counselors. But the conference is really another way that you get to not only meet individuals face to face or off the road, because we're always running back and forth from one high school fair to the next and one high school visit to the next. But also this opportunity allows you to sit on some very important conference sessions. I'll be working with 2 other colleagues from Elon and Georgia Southern University to be able to talk about the transfer admission process and what type of resources and disadvantages those type of students have to face, and how we can help as professionals within our organization. So there's going to be tons of different opportunities, tons of different topics that you can get involved in. And so hopefully we'll be able to see you there in Jacksonville between April 23rd and 25th. So thank you all again for attending today. We're going to go back to our legislative sessions. We're going to hear our next committee session with Senator Book. I'm going to also try to represent in Miami areas and Palm Beach areas. I know Richie is going to do his best as well too, representing the Tampa area. But any questions that you have, any other opportunities that you want to get involved, please let us know, or any questions that I can help you with, whether it's different topics that we can focus on, specific bills that you want to support. We're happy to be able to advocate and represent our organization. And I just want to thank Kelly from our SACAC co-chair for government relations, and Richie again. It's been wonderful having the support and being able to have that involvement from different members all throughout Florida. And I really hope that you all feel that you can integrate more and more with us through different initiatives and be able to represent our organization. So again, thank you for all that you do. And we know college admission counseling isn't, it's very self-sacrificing role in itself. And so we know we're asking sometimes, an extra from each one of you to be able to get involved in these other areas. But it really is something that we're all passionate about, and we love meeting more passionate people. So definitely connect with us and let us know if you want to participate in any way. But thank you again, Richie. Thank you, everyone. And we'll see you at SACAC conference.
Thank you, Rose. Everyone have a great day.
Take care. Thank you.